The sound of bone cracking echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Madison Parker collapsed onto the cold linoleum floor, her knee throbbing from the brutal assault, as Bradford Sterling and his three accomplices stood over her like predators claiming territory. More than 200 students held up their phones, recording every second of what they thought would be just another viral bullying video. "This is how we handle scholarship trash who don't know their place," Bradford roared, his expensive sneakers still stained with blood. But instead of crying or begging like every victim before her, Madison simply wiped the blood from her lip and smiled mysteriously. She looked directly into the nearest camera and whispered, "Thank you for recording everything." In exactly 20 minutes, everything would change completely. What Bradford and his crew didn't realize was they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, and it was all being filmed from 6 different angles. The attack had been swift and calculated. Bradford Sterling, 18 years old and built like the basketball team captain he was, had cornered Madison during the lunch rush when the maximum number of witnesses would be present. His father wasn't just the principal of Riverside High School. He was also the mayor of their small Oregon border town, which meant Bradford had grown up believing he was untouchable. Jake Morrison, the sheriff's son with arms like tree trunks, had grabbed Madison's backpack and slammed her against the lockers, while Connor Hayes, the tech genius whose family owned half the local businesses, made sure every angle was being live-streamed to his followers. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt powerless against someone who seemed untouchable, hit that like button right now. Your support means everything to those of us who believe that bullies should never win, no matter how much power they think they have. And if you've got your own story of standing up to injustice, drop it in the comments below, because sometimes sharing our experiences is the first step toward healing. Don't forget to subscribe, because what you're about to witness will remind you that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones who look the weakest. Madison had transferred to Riverside High exactly 3 months ago, arriving with nothing but a worn duffel bag and paperwork that identified her as a scholarship student from the foster care system. She kept to herself, sat alone at lunch, and never spoke unless directly questioned by teachers. To everyone else, she was invisible, unremarkable. Just another poor kid trying to survive until graduation. But there were things about Madison that didn't quite add up if you knew what to look for. The first anomaly was subtle. While other students slouched in their chairs or leaned against walls, Madison always positioned herself with her back to a wall and a clear view of all exits. Her posture was too perfect, too controlled, like someone who had been trained to maintain constant situational awareness. The second detail was her breathing. Even when surprised by loud noises or unexpected confrontations, her respiratory pattern remained steady and measured, the kind of control that took years of specialized training to develop. The third clue was hidden in plain sight. Madison wore a simple black digital watch that looked standard enough, except for the small tactical markings around the bezel that served no purpose for a typical teenager. Most people assumed it was just a cheap knockoff of a military-style timepiece, but the subtle wear patterns suggested it had seen real use in demanding conditions. Bradford had been targeting Madison since her second week at school, starting with verbal harassment about her second-hand clothes and lack of social connections. When she failed to react to his insults, he escalated to spreading rumors about her being mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. The campaign was methodical and cruel, designed to isolate her even further from any potential allies. "Look at her just lying there," Connor sneered, adjusting his phone to get a better angle. "I bet she doesn't even have insurance to fix that knee." The crowd of students pressed closer, their phones creating a forest of glowing screens, all focused on Madison's prone form. Some looked horrified by the violence they were witnessing, but none stepped forward to help. This was the unspoken rule at Riverside High. When Bradford Sterling decided someone needed to be taught a lesson, you either participated or you stayed out of the way. Madison slowly pushed herself up into a sitting position, her movements deliberate despite the obvious pain in her leg. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a standard smartphone. Except this device was reinforced with military-grade protective casing that seemed far too sophisticated for a teenager living on government assistance. The phone had capabilities that went far beyond typical consumer electronics, equipped with forensic-quality recording features, real-time data encryption, and synchronization with surveillance networks that law enforcement agencies used for gathering evidence. Every threat, every act of violence, every incriminating word was being captured according to legal standards, creating irrefutable proof that would hold up in federal court. While Bradford and his accomplices believed they were hiding their crimes, they were actually building a comprehensive case file against themselves, one perfectly documented incident at a time. This wasn't just some teenager's phone. This was a professional evidence-gathering tool designed specifically for undercover operations. "Holy cow! Look at her gadgets!" Jake mocked, pointing at Madison's device. "Daddy government buy you that fancy phone with our tax dollars?" The irony was lost on him completely. While he assumed Madison was just another welfare recipient, she was actually documenting every aspect of their criminal enterprise with technology that cost more than his father's annual salary. Madison's training had taught her to endure, to gather intelligence, to wait for the perfect moment when her targets would expose themselves completely. 6 months of undercover work had led to this point, and Bradford's attack was providing exactly the evidence she needed to bring down the entire network. But her mission required her to maintain her cover, no matter how brutal the harassment became. The first escalation point had occurred 3 weeks earlier when Bradford convinced Connor to hack into Madison's bank account, draining the few $100s she supposedly received from foster care services. What they didn't realize was that the account was a carefully constructed federal asset, monitored by multiple agencies and designed to track exactly these kinds of financial crimes. Every unauthorized access was logged. Every fraudulent transaction created another federal charge. The second escalation had been more personal. Bradford and his crew had followed Madison to the parking lot after school and set fire to her motorcycle, a beat-up Honda that served as her only transportation. They filmed themselves laughing as the flames consumed what they assumed was her most valuable possession, never suspecting that the bike was equipped with hidden cameras that recorded their faces in perfect detail as they committed arson. Bradford stepped closer to where Madison sat against the lockers, his basketball shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "You know what your problem is?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear and record. "You actually think you matter. You think because you get good grades and keep your mouth shut, that somehow makes you special." His voice carried the particular cruelty that came from a lifetime of never facing consequences for his actions. Madison looked up at him with those strangely calm eyes that had puzzled teachers and students since her arrival. "And what do you think makes you special, Bradford?" she asked quietly. Her voice carried no fear, no anger, just a genuine curiosity that seemed completely inappropriate for someone who had just been violently assaulted. The question caught Bradford off guard because it wasn't what victims were supposed to say. They were supposed to beg, to apologize, to promise they would stay out of his way. They weren't supposed to turn the conversation around and start asking questions like they were conducting some kind of interview. "What makes me special?" Bradford's face flushed red with anger. "My family built this town. My father controls everything that matters. I can make your life hell whenever I want, and nobody can stop me." It was exactly the kind of admission that federal prosecutors loved to play for juries. The sort of arrogant confession that destroyed defendants in courtrooms. Madison nodded thoughtfully, as if she were genuinely considering his argument. That's interesting. So you're saying your father's position gives you immunity from consequences? That local political power means federal law doesn't apply to you? She was leading him exactly where she needed him to go, and Bradford was too blinded by rage to realize he was being manipulated. Federal law? Connor laughed harshly. What are you, some kind of junior lawyer now? Nobody cares about federal law in a place like this. This is our territory. Another perfect soundbite for the prosecution, delivered with the kind of contempt that would make appeals courts shake their heads in disgust. The fourth escalation point had occurred just last week, when Bradford decided that psychological harassment wasn't enough. He had cornered Madison in an empty classroom after school, pressing a knife against her ribs while Jake and Connor blocked the exits. They had threatened to carve their initials into her skin if she didn't drop out of school voluntarily, never realizing that every word was being transmitted live to a federal monitoring station 200 miles away. Madison had submitted to the threat without resistance, playing her role as the helpless victim while her handlers prepared emergency response protocols. The knife attack had crossed the line from bullying into aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, a federal crime when it involved organized criminal enterprises. Bradford's arrogance was systematically destroying every legal protection his family's money and influence might have provided. Now, sitting on the hallway floor with her knee throbbing and 200 phones pointed at her, Madison was approaching the moment she had been working toward for 6 months. Bradford was about to make the mistake that would justify everything that came next. And she was going to make sure every second was documented with perfect clarity. "You want to know something funny?" Madison said, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearby cameras to pick up clearly. "I've been keeping track of everything you've done to me. Every threat, every attack, every federal crime you've committed, thinking you were untouchable." She reached into her other pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a standard student ID card, but was actually a sophisticated recording system that had been running continuously since her first day at school. Bradford's expression shifted from confident cruelty to something approaching uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but his voice had lost some of its earlier swagger. Something about Madison's calm confidence was beginning to penetrate his arrogance, creating the first cracks in his sense of invulnerability. "I'm talking about documentation," Madison replied, holding up the device so everyone could see it clearly. 6 months of evidence gathering, every crime recorded, every threat documented, every federal statute violation carefully catalogued according to prosecutorial standards. She was finally beginning to reveal the scope of what had been happening right under their noses, and Bradford was starting to realize that he might not be the predator in this situation after all. The hallway had gone strangely quiet, as students began to sense that something had shifted in the dynamic between victim and aggressor. Madison wasn't behaving like someone who had just been brutally attacked. She was behaving like someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, someone who had been in control of the situation from the very beginning. Jake Morrison's face twisted with rage as he processed what Madison was implying. "You think you're smart recording us?" he snarled, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a switchblade that glinted under the fluorescent hallway lights. "Let's see how smart you are when I delete everything permanently." The crowd of students gasped and several stepped backward, but none of them ran to get help. This was the moment Madison had been waiting for, the escalation that would justify everything that came next. Bradford grabbed Jake's arm before he could move closer. "Wait!" he hissed, his mind working frantically. If she's been recording us, then destroying her stuff won't matter. The evidence is probably already uploaded somewhere. For the first time since the confrontation began, Bradford was thinking strategically instead of just reacting with violence. Unfortunately for him, he was already 6 months too late. Madison slowly stood up, testing her injured knee, but maintaining perfect balance despite the pain. Her movement was too fluid, too controlled for someone who had supposedly never learned to fight. "You're absolutely right, Bradford," she said calmly. "The evidence has been uploading in real time since the moment I arrived at this school. Every conversation, every threat, every federal crime has been automatically transmitted to secure servers that your father's influence can't reach." When Bradford realized the gravity of his situation, Madison activated the emergency protocol on a cloud forensics platform that the FBI used for exactly these scenarios. This system automatically analyzed, cataloged, and distributed evidence to multiple agencies simultaneously, ensuring that no level of corruption could suppress the truth. Within seconds, every video, audio recording, and piece of metadata was replicated across secure servers, creating a perfect audit trail for federal prosecution. This was precisely why organized crime rings feared this technology above all else, because it made their traditional methods of intimidation and cover-ups completely obsolete. Connor's face had gone pale as he began to understand the implications. "Holy cow," he whispered, his phone trembling in his hands. "She's been setting us up this entire time." The realization hit him like a physical blow. Every cruel joke, every criminal act, every moment of assumed safety had been an illusion. They weren't the predators in this story. They were the prey. Madison reached into her jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gold badge and federal identification that made the entire hallway fall silent. "Special Agent Madison Parker, Federal Bureau of Investigation," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been trained to command respect in life-or-death situations. "Bradford Sterling, Jake Morrison, Connor Hayes, you are all under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, assault with a deadly weapon, and violation of federal trafficking statutes." The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The quiet scholarship student disappeared completely, replaced by a federal agent who moved with the precision of someone trained in combat techniques that went far beyond high school athletics. Madison's posture straightened, her eyes became alert and calculating, and her voice carried the unmistakable tone of law enforcement authority. Bradford's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You can't be serious," he stammered. "You're just a kid. You're nobody." But even as he spoke, he could see the truth in her eyes. This wasn't a bluff or some elaborate prank. The girl he had been tormenting for 6 months was a federal agent who had been gathering evidence against his family's criminal enterprise. "I'm 18 years old and I've been working undercover operations since I graduated from the Federal Law Enforcement Academy 2 years ago," Madison explained matter-of-factly. "Your family's trafficking network killed my parents when I was 15. The Bureau gave me a choice. Let their murders go unpunished, or help bring down the organization responsible. I chose justice. I'm also the Oregon State Kickboxing champion from 2 years ago, before I went undercover. The Bureau recruited me specifically because I could handle myself in physical confrontations." Jake raised his knife higher, desperation making him reckless. "I don't care who you think you are," he growled. "You're not walking out of here alive." It was exactly the threat Madison needed to justify what happened next. 6 months of careful evidence gathering had led to this moment, and Jake's escalation to lethal force gave her legal authority to respond with appropriate measures. Madison's movement was so fast that most of the students with phones couldn't even capture it clearly. She sidestepped Jake's clumsy knife thrust, grabbed his wrist with a technique that demonstrated years of professional training, and twisted until the weapon clattered harmlessly to the floor. In the same fluid motion, she swept his legs and put him face down on the linoleum with his arm twisted behind his back in a perfect law enforcement restraint hold. "That's aggravated assault on a federal officer," she said calmly, maintaining pressure on Jake's arm while reaching for plastic zip ties that she pulled from yet another hidden pocket. "Add that to your list of federal charges." Her breathing hadn't even increased despite the physical confrontation. This was someone who had been trained for combat situations far more dangerous than a high school hallway. Connor dropped his phone and tried to run, but Madison called out in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Connor Hayes, if you take one more step, you'll be adding fleeing and evasion to your charges. Stop where you are and place your hands behind your head." The command was delivered with such professional certainty that Connor froze instinctively, his body responding to the tone of law enforcement before his mind could process resistance. Bradford was backing away slowly, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and growing panic. "This is impossible," he kept muttering. "You can't be FBI, you're just some foster kid. My father would have known if federal agents were investigating us." His worldview was crumbling in real time as he realized that his family's supposedly untouchable criminal empire had been infiltrated by someone he had dismissed as powerless. "Your father did know," Madison replied, securing Jake's restraints before standing up to face Bradford directly. "Principal Sterling has been under federal surveillance for 8 months. We know about the trafficking routes through the school, the money laundering through athletic programs, the corrupt officials on your payroll. We have documented evidence of everything, including your father's direct involvement in my parents' murders." The sound of vehicles screeching to a halt outside the school building echoed through the hallway's windows. Madison smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, but it wasn't the mysterious expression she had worn earlier. This was the satisfied smile of someone whose carefully executed plan was reaching its successful conclusion. "That would be my backup," she announced as the sound of multiple car doors slamming shut reached everyone's ears. "Special Agent Rodriguez and the Federal Task Force have been monitoring this operation remotely. The moment Jake threatened me with a weapon, they received authorization to move in and execute arrest warrants for your entire network." Heavy footsteps thundered through the school's main entrance as federal agents in tactical gear flooded the building. The students with phones found themselves witnessing the climax of a 6-month federal investigation, and their recordings would soon become evidence in one of the largest trafficking prosecutions in the region's history. Bradford made one last desperate attempt to maintain his delusion of power. "My father will have you transferred," he threatened weakly. "You have no idea who you're messing with." But his voice lacked conviction, because he was finally beginning to understand exactly who he had been messing with for the past 6 months. "Your father is currently being arrested in his office," Madison informed him as the first federal agents rounded the corner into their hallway. "Along with Officer Walsh, Judge Martinez, and 12 other members of your trafficking network. This operation is over, Bradford. Your family's protection is gone." The arrest happened exactly as Madison had envisioned it during months of planning. Bradford Sterling, the untouchable mayor's son who had terrorized students for years, was handcuffed and read his rights while 200 phones captured every second. The viral video that was supposed to show another victim being humiliated instead became evidence of federal justice being served in the most public way possible. As agents led Bradford away, he looked back at Madison with a mixture of hatred and something that might have been respect. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the chaos of the arrest. Madison's expression remained professional, but there was a hint of personal satisfaction in her eyes. "Since the day your family murdered my parents," she replied. "Justice took 3 years, but it was worth the wait." The resolution came swiftly and comprehensively. Within hours, the entire Sterling trafficking network was dismantled, with federal charges filed against 23 individuals, including corrupt officials, school administrators, and local business owners. Bradford, Jake, and Connor were transferred to federal detention facilities where their families' local influence meant absolutely nothing. But as Madison packed her few belongings that evening, preparing for her next assignment, her encrypted phone received a notification that made her pause. A new message had appeared on the school's anonymous tip system, posted just 30 minutes after Bradford's arrest. The message was simple, but ominous. "Impressive work, Agent Parker, but you only caught the local branch. The real network is much larger than you realize. We've been watching you watch them. Ready for the next level?" Madison stared at the screen, her professional instincts immediately recognizing the implications. She had succeeded in her mission, brought justice for her parents, and dismantled what she thought was the complete criminal organization. But someone else had been monitoring the entire operation, someone with knowledge of federal investigation techniques and access to secure systems. The phone buzzed again with a second message that made her blood run cold. "Check your email. You'll find surveillance photos of yourself that we took during the investigation. We know who you really are, where you're going next, and what your real assignment will be." This was just the beginning. Madison's hands trembled slightly as she realized that bringing down the Sterling network might have exposed her to an even more dangerous enemy, one that had been manipulating events from the shadows while she focused on her immediate targets.